Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Now, as we go into the Memorial Day weekend, we're naturally reminded again of the horrors of war, this holiday instituted after the American Civil War, that immense, useless slaughter fought in the name of vile causes like secessionism, slavery, and otherwise reflecting a British Empire world offensive, which included the Crimean War attack on Russia, the Great Mutiny in India with the attendant massacre, Napoleon III, puppet ruler of France, attacking in Mexico as well as in Indochina, the Spanish seizing Santo Domingo once the U.S. was locked in the Civil War. So that entire horror is in our minds on Memorial Day weekend. Now let's look at the state of imperialism. Have they learned anything? The answer is no. The one thing we can say is that if we look now at the first 5 months almost of the great revolutionary year or counter-revolutionary year of 2011, the rhythm of the imperialist attack has decidedly slowed. At the beginning of the year, they were hoping to overthrow one regime per month and perhaps more. In January, they overthrew Ben Ali of Tunisia with a military coup planned behind the scenes, a putsch, a palace operation, but with a bunch of young idealists and dupes out in the public square who really thought that they had overthrown a government. Well, dear friends, unfortunately, street demonstrations do not add up to a struggle for power unless you've got something more than that. You better have a leader, you better have a program, you better have an organization, and you better know what you're doing. And it can't be controlled by the U.S. State Department with the slogans recycled from Otpor in Belgrade. So that was January. February, Mubarak. April 6th movement, a complete clone of Otpor. And what do we find a very interesting thing? The departure of Mubarak. This is an interesting historical problem, right? Because as we said to you at the time, the fall of Mubarak was essentially some kind of an ultimatum from the United States, some kind of blood-curdling threat, possibly involving the seizure of the Suez Canal. And now we have some inside testimony. This is a guy called Saad Eddin Ibrahim, S-A-A-D, Saad Eddin Ibrahim. He's back in Egypt from exile, and of course one of the first things he has to do is to talk to Lolly Weymouth, the very charming representative of the family that owns the Washington Post. She's essentially one of the relatives of the late Catherine Meyer Graham, who died 10 years ago this summer. So here we are, Monday, May 23rd, in the Washington Post, the uncertain legacy of Tahrir Square. So this is one of these special interviews that Lolly Weymouth does, and at a certain point, she asks, the army decided to get rid of Mubarak, right? Question mark. So here's what our dear friend Saad Ibrahim, the insider, says. The Egyptian chief of staff, that's Tantawi, on orders from the White House, was escalating the pressure. Oh, the Egyptian chief of staff was receiving orders from the White House in Washington, D.C. He was escalating the pressure. President Obama's advisors, says Saad Ibrahim, are my good friends Samantha Power and Michael McFaul, and they asked me to come to Washington. They relied on me as a source. After Mubarak's second speech, remember the second speech was the one where he said, I'm not leaving. That was, I guess, the Thursday, was it? After Mubarak's second speech, Obama became convinced that Mubarak had to go. And that's when the blood-curdling ultimatums were made, and then finally Hosni capitulated the next day. But isn't this interesting? It confirms the thesis here. This was a palace coup, a military putsch organized by the CIA. the Egyptian Chief of Staff, Tantawi, the guy who's running the show now, on orders from the White House, was escalating the pressure. And here we have what I was writing already in January. Samantha Power is one of the key people in this coup process, right? She stays in the background. She doesn't come out and shoot her filthy mouth off, her potty mouth that she had going in the British Isles during the 2008 campaign. She had to retreat into the shadows after that. There she has stayed. That's, of course, Cass Sunstein's wife. Michael McFaul, this is a quackademic who all during the 90s, when the IMF would come out with shock therapy, brutal attacks on Russia and other countries, McFaul was one of the cheerleaders. He was one of the cheerleaders of Yeltsin, of Chubais, of Nemtsov, of Yegor Gaidar, the late, and so forth. That's McFaul. So those are your revolutionaries, dear friends. Samantha Power, imperialist ideologue. She's interested in genocide, but not the genocide committed by the U.S., the genocide committed by the others. And Michael McFaul, a cheerleader, a public relations flunky for the IMF, the World Bank, and the U.S. Federal Reserve. All right, so isn't that interesting? Confirmed. But the result now of this is, the upshot, January, Ben Ali falls. February, Mubarak falls. As March came in, they were assuming this is going to be Gaddafi. Gaddafi will fall in March. Well, surprise. Gaddafi fought back and stripped away this amiable mask of slogans about democracy and the rule of law and the singing tomorrows spread by the State Department. Notice never any really significant economic demands, nothing about the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, these other oppressive imperialist institutions. So in March, nobody fell. How about April? They would think, well, if we didn't get him in March, we'll get him in April. The bombing had begun on the 19th of March. They were bombing Libya, but they couldn't get Gaddafi out. In April, still nobody fell. And now May is almost over, and still nobody has fallen. They're trying hard in Yemen. They're stoking up what they can in Syria. And as we see now, every night, a new attempt to kill Gaddafi. This is now Murder Incorporated. Let's change the name of NATO to Murder Incorporated. It's also got essentially the feature of being the air support service for terrorists from Al-Qaeda and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group on the ground. But there it is. January, one puppet overthrown, Ben Ali. February, Mubarak overthrown. But March, April, and now as far as we can see, May, it's almost the end of May, no destabilizations, no successful postmodern coups. The Yemen civil war has escalated in the last 48 hours. They're going to be trying that. Syria continues pretty much in the current mode, but the big attempt, I think, is going to be to try to assassinate Gaddafi. Either that or a false flag operation growing out of their desperation that would then give them the pretext for the land invasion. They could at least go in and drive Gaddafi out of Tripoli and other cities, but then we would be back to the Black Hawk Down. And speaking of Black Hawk Down, the French and the British are in a flight forward. They are desperate. These, of course, are bankrupt powers. This is the financially bankrupt as well as being morally and politically bankrupt. The French and the British are now going to send in attack helicopters. Those are the ones they say that can fly very low in urban areas and can attack specific targets. Well, go take a look at that Black Hawk Down movie, and you'll see what's waiting for you. A simple RPG or even something simpler can often do a significant job on these helicopters. I'm wondering, are these helicopters invulnerable? I assume they're not. So get set for more escalation in Libya, and that's just the beginning. Now, in our second segment, we'll go to Pakistan, which is the really hot front. Back in a minute.